Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being invited to speak to all of you today all about science communication. So today I'm going to be sharing some lessons that I've learned over the last 10 years doing science communication, and I hope it can be helpful for all of you going forward. So before we get started, I would feel remiss in not including a squid in every talk that I give. So the squid that you're looking at right now is the squid that I did my PhD on, the Hawaiian bobtail squid. And so now we're gonna leave the squid and talk more about the science communication itself. Sorry about that. Okay, so it's my firm belief that almost all of us need to be talking with the public about science. We're in a time right now that's pretty scary. Misinformation is spreading faster than it ever has before, and it's really, really easy for people to get misinformation out and reach people where they are, and in a way that people trust this misinformation more than they trust experts. And this really all comes down to who people trust. There are a lot of bad faith actors right now trying to get misinformation out there, and we really have to think about where people are getting their information. Whereas 50 years ago, all that information may have been coming from newspapers or the TV news, now it comes from social media. And so if you know that there are people out there trying to make you make decisions that only help them and not help you, you're gonna trust people that you know personally, that you know aren't trying to hurt you. Maybe your aunt, maybe your high school friend, maybe your siblings. And so that's how social media has become such a powerful place for misinformation to spread, because you only need one person to believe the misinformation to spread it to a whole bunch of other people that trust that person. And so we really have to ask ourselves as scientists why people don't trust us. And so, like a scientist, we go to the data to figure out why this is all happening. And so there are a number of studies that happen periodically, like every year or every 3 years, that look at the public's perception of science and scientists. And so 3M is one of the groups that does this regularly. They have the 3M State of Science. This is like a 30-page long collection of results all about the public's perception of scientists. And as I was looking through here, there are a couple pretty disturbing things that came out. First, 32% of people are skeptical of science. That I could believe and handle. But even worse is that 57% of people say that science causes as many problems as it solves. And that's pretty upsetting for a group of people, especially in marine conservation, that have our main goal to make the world a better, safer place for everyone. And so another really interesting, if not slightly upsetting piece of information was that while 20% of people said that they don't trust scientists, 14% of people said they don't trust science as an institution. And that really makes you think, okay, what is the difference in these people's minds between science as an institution and scientists as people? We've got a PR problem. And so when I was thinking about how to figure out why the heck this was happening, I asked myself, well, what examples of scientists do people have to work with if they don't personally know any scientists? And so I went to Google image search and typed in movie scientist. And this was on the first page. It's a bummer. So what we see on the first page of results, we've got the socially inept, the socially awkward, the actively evil. It's a bad scene. This is not how we want people perceiving scientists. They're almost all male. They're all white. And even when we get to the second and third page of results, we get some women, we get some social grace, but they're still all white. They're still all straight, and we're leaving out huge portions of the population with this portrayal of scientists. And so you can't blame people for not relating to these characters and not trusting them. Now, of course, this is all fiction, but these sorts of things add up over time in the public psyche and isn't helping our cause at all. So another piece of information was that most Americans can't name a living scientist. This is the a poll of United States public, and it comes out once a year. And it's pretty much the same every year. That number of yes and no's varies from year to year. But those that could name a living scientist named, you know, the NGTs and the Bill Nyes, the Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye and Jane Goodall, and but most of them named Stephen Hawking, who is not even a living scientist anymore. So after this came out, it was making the rounds on Twitter, and one of our colleagues, David Steen, put out this actual living scientist hashtag, and it immediately caught on. His goal was to show people what actual scientists that are out there in the field doing work look like. And so immediately you saw a stark difference if you clicked that hashtag, and you can still look it up today, the stark difference between what the movie scientists looked like in that Google image search versus all of the scientists that you see populate in that list. And so this kind of activity, this science communication, I think is really, really important, because we need to first and foremost show people that scientists are just like them. So I'm really imploring all of you to get into science communication if you think you can help. At the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that almost all of us need to be doing science communication. And so we all know somebody, perhaps in our department or that we see at meetings or what have you, that really are not trying to do science communication. They think it's a waste of time. They're kind of curmudgeon-y about it. That's fine. We don't need that person to go out there. Just have people that want to do it. A lot of times you'll see science communicators say every single scientist needs to be communicating science, and I don't necessarily think that's true. But if you want to, there's space for you to do it. Let's make it happen. Because just talking as a representative of science is really, really helpful. Giving people a friendly face to associate with science can do a lot of good, even if you're not directly teaching them some piece of information that you think they need to know. When you're getting started, practice a lot, because you can't expect to be perfect at this right away, and that's okay. A really important thing to remember before you get started is that the deficit model, which is to say that people are making the wrong choice in their life because they just don't have all the facts, they just don't have all the information. That's not really true. People are often making their decisions based on emotions and social circles. And so we, as scientists, we're spending a lot of time looking at data, assessing data, making conclusions, and we have to accept that that's just our way of doing things. And that's not how everyone makes their decisions. That's not how everyone lives their lives. And it's absolutely acceptable for those folks to make decisions using things other than science. It's only one way of approaching your world and making decisions. So we need to appeal to the emotions of people in addition to their logic. So before you get started in science communication, there's a couple things that you really have to sit down and ask yourself. The first thing is, who do you want to reach? This is a pandemic right now, but let's say that it's not, and you're planning an event out in your community. Think about the local bar that you or your friends go to if you happen to be a drinker. If you're not a drinker, think about where you are spending your Friday nights when you're leaving the house. Think about who else is at that place. Think about the groups of people that show up. Think about maybe the age groups. And then ask yourself, who's not showing up to that place? Maybe if it's a bar, you'll miss everybody who doesn't drink. You're gonna miss people who maybe are recovering alcoholics, maybe people who have a religious reason to not drink. There are a lot of people who don't go to bars. There are a lot of people who maybe can't get into your favorite venue because it's not wheelchair accessible. And so you always want to ask yourself, how is the design of your event influencing who you're actually reaching? And so your approach is going to influence who you actually communicate with. You also want to ask yourself what you want them to know. People have generally pretty short attention spans, especially these days. And also during a pandemic, we're all completely exhausted because the world is a pretty bleak place. And so you want to keep your message simple and keep it as straightforward as possible. In science, we often want to include all the pieces of information, and we want to include all of the caveats, and we want to always start your sentence with, well, based on what we know so far, blah, 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 blah. And that's how we're trained, and that's how we communicate with each other. But we have to kind of remind ourselves that not everybody talks that way, and really think about how your message is either understandable to folks or not, and simplify that message down to the simplest that it can be, still true. And lastly, and this is so, so important, you want to have people, you want to think about how they're feeling in response to what you're saying. Because again, emotions are more important than we may give them credit for people making decisions about what to do with their lives. And so maybe you want them to feel hopeful for the recovery of the humpback whale. Maybe you want them to feel empowered to start only buying sustainable fisheries caught locally or something like that. Maybe you want them to just generally feel excited about all the animals that we don't know yet in the deep sea. There's a lot of ways that we can inspire people to change or just to get excited about what we're talking about. And so come back to these questions first at the beginning before you begin. Halfway through, think, am I actually doing what I thought I was? And then afterward, assess and think about for the next time what you need to change. So when you are communicating science, I want you to think about how best to hook people. Because unlike in the classroom, where many of us have communicated with folks before, these people that we're communicating with, they owe us nothing. They don't owe us their attention. They don't owe us their time. So we need to find a way to engage them in a way that makes them want to engage with us. And so think about how you would want to spend your night. Many people don't want to go to a lecture at a bar after work because they've already sat all day long. Maybe make it a game. Maybe have it be less of like sit down and listen and have it be a two-way kind of conversation. Incorporate games. Generally speaking, adults are pretty starved for play, but all humans love to play. So having games can really help bring that along. You want to engage participants in active ways that they can kind of come to conclusions on their own. And that can often happen via games or activities instead of you just coming in as the expert and telling them how it is. Because nobody wants to be told like, I know what's going on and you don't know what's going on. That's generally not great. Some people, of course, do like to sit and listen to an expert, but probably that's going to be what I affectionately refer to as the NPR crowd, and maybe not the group that will really be expanding our audience. It's going to be the same people who listen to us no matter what we do or say. So there was a study done that I should have put the citation for, I now realize, that there are key motivators for attendance specifically for millennial audiences. That's what this study was looking at. And the reason that people get off the couch, leave their house, and go to an event is for entertainment, makes sense, personal growth, or unique experiences. I'm about to say something slightly cynical. We sometimes, can you imagine going to a place specifically because you know it's going to look good on your Instagram account later that day? Maybe you don't really care about picking apples, but you know you look really cute picking apples, and so you're going to go pick apples because it looks good on Instagram later. And so you want to think that there are a lot of people thinking this way. So can you offer something from your science, from what you know about, that will make for a good Instagram post? It's kind of cynical, but it'll get people to your event. And we need to meet people where they are and appeal to what they want to do. So when you're designing your message, you really need to know what you want people to know. And you also want to know what you want them to leave feeling. And you should kind of like, as a framework, pick 2 or 3 pieces of information or feelings that you want them to leave with. Because generally speaking, maybe you're like, oh my gosh, I have to tell them everything there is to know about vampire squid and how, I don't know, shipping lanes affects their ecology. It's like, well, maybe just leave with 2 or 3 pieces of information, because then they'll actually remember it. And so today, in today's talk, I really want to impart to you to listen to your audience, to entertain before you try to educate them, and then also engage people in active activities and not one-way deliveries of information. So we know that when you're communicating science, you can often feel like you're the expert, but it's absolutely essential that you listen to your audience, because we have a bad reputation of being seen as pretentious. I was literally just last week having a conversation with a fisherman that swam over to a dock when I was down at Sea Isle in New Jersey. And he was like, oh, you're a marine biologist. You must think you know more about the ocean than I do, but I know more about the ocean than you do. And I literally hadn't said 2 words to this guy yet. And so we know that that man had probably experienced marine biologists going to him and saying that they know more about the swordfish and the tuna that he catches, he spends his life working with, than he does. And that's probably not true. And so it's really, really important that we listen as much as we speak. So you should start conversations wherever you can. And Skype a Scientist, the program that I started, really focuses on conversations over one-way deliveries of information. The group that really likes one-way deliveries of information tends to be the choir, people that'll sit down and read a whole science book, or will listen to a lecture. We love those people, we are those people. But if we're trying to break out of our bubble, the one-way deliveries is really not the method you probably want to be using. A lot of times, particularly during a pandemic, a lot of our conversations are happening online. And so that's more challenging, because social media is sort of designed in many places as one-way deliveries of information. So you kind of have to get creative when you're trying to make that engaging kind of information. So maybe make a poll. Maybe ask questions of your audience and then be prepared to engage with your audience. Reply to others' tweets so that that conversation keeps going. And maybe make games. A great example of a game that happens every week is Erin McGee's Find That Lizard. She's a phenomenal science communicator, and she posts a picture that has a lizard somewhere in there. And then you have hundreds of people playing that game every week. And so that is a good back and forth that can happen. So when there's not a pandemic on, there's lots of places where you can go to meet people where they are. It's sort of, presumptuous of us to say, okay, I've made a science event at the Science Center. My community needs to come to me to have that engagement. Sometimes you've got to put your backpack on and go to them. And so you can do this, of course, at bars for some members of the population. You can go to farmers markets. You can physically go to schools. One thing I learned last year is that in Connecticut, where I did my graduate school, they did not teach any science in the curriculum until 5th grade. No science until 5th grade. That was wild to me. And so the elementary school teachers, they didn't necessarily not want to teach science. It's just it wasn't part of the curriculum. So when graduate students at UConn reached out and said, hey, we'll do a science night at your school, they leapt at the opportunity. So there's a lot of places where you can supplement the public education system, depending on where you are, to help a lot. And then also think about community centers. Maybe you don't go to the YMCA on your weekend, but a lot of people do. So you want to figure out in your community, in your target audience, where are they gathering? Maybe it's church. Generally speaking, churches are not opposed to science. Some of them may be, but not all of them are not. And so there's a group called DOSER, D-O-S-E-R. They're a group out of AAAS, and they work specifically on communicating science to religious communities. And so maybe you want to see what they have to offer for going to meet people where they are, where they gather every Saturday or Sunday, or whichever other day they meet at the church. So generally speaking, don't be afraid to communicate with folks where they already gather, because that decreases the activation energy that they need to meet with you. Another important thing when you're thinking about how to design these events is that people, all people, love to learn about themselves. So maybe you want to do that cheek swab, again, when there's not a pandemic, because we cannot be dealing with spit right now, but do the cheek swab DNA extraction, or just have them explore their own bodies. I have this, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but this little microscope, it costs $100. It's battery operated, so I can bring it anywhere. And I ask people to look at their fingernail beds, because you think you know what your hand looks like, right? But if you look up close at your fingernail beds, I don't care how recently you've had a manicure, it looks like a mountain range in there. It's wild looking. And so if you can hook people with learning a little bit more about themselves, it's generally a pretty successful route. So that's just like a hot tip for you, take it or leave it. Now, of course, right now, we're in a really unique situation for science communication, because we can't go to the community center, we can't go to the bar. We need to kind of get creative in how we can reach people. And now I know this is an international conference, perhaps where you are right now, you totally can go to the bar, but at least for the United States, we really have to stay in our houses, and many other places as well. And so generally speaking, this year has been horrible for a lot of people. And so joy is on short supply. So think about how you can bring kind of a spark of excitement to someone where you live without physically talking to them. So one thing that I've seen come up that I really loved and kind of warmed my heart is that a fellow squid biologist, this was not me, this was Donna Staff. She wrote the book Squid Empire and got her PhD in squid biology at Stanford. She put a sign in her window that said sidewalk science, and then wrote, like, ask your squid questions here on the sidewalk. And people wrote all sorts of questions, and then she would answer them, so she wouldn't have to be near other people, but she was still engaging with her community and listening to what they really wanted to know before just delivering information to them. So think about what your skills are and how you can interact with your community in perhaps unconventional ways during a pandemic. An important thing to note is that not all science communication involves you, the scientist, standing in front of a community and being super gregarious. You don't need to be an extrovert to be an effective science communicator, because there are so many ways to communicate science. Doing art of many different styles is super successful. Maybe a podcast where you only talk to one other person. Think about where your skills lie, and importantly, where you are having the most fun. Because wherever you are having fun, you're gonna have a more successful time at science communication, because you'll wanna do more of it. And also your audience can tell whether you're having a good time or not. And so just think about where your skills are, where you're having fun, do that. Maybe you love to be the center of attention. So go ahead, do an event at a bar where you're in front of a lot of people. Maybe you are really good at video editing because you spend all your time on microscopy, or maybe camera traps, and you're like, I've got great stuff for the visual medium, make a YouTube channel. We've got so many different ways to communicate science. Just find one that works for you. So now I have a couple slides of practical tips for doing science communication in many different ways. So my first piece of advice is use your audience. This is true online, this is true in real life. Generally speaking, everyone is on their phone right now. So leverage your audience, because you have a captive audience. Maybe it's your followers, maybe it's people who showed up to your online or in real life event, but every one of those is connected to 200 to 1,000 extra people that didn't come to your event. So if you can convince them to post to their followers about whatever it was that you were trying to communicate to them, you just had an exponentially larger impact because they shared what you told them or taught them, perhaps. And so think about how you can make those people share information and incentivize them to do that. It's an opportunity that you don't want to miss. Next, we want to make sure that we're checking that what we're doing is actually useful. If you're doing this on a bigger scale, keep in mind that you may need IRB approval. I'm not sure suddenly if that's a United States thing or everywhere thing, but generally you may need to get approved to do research on humans. But if it's just for your own purposes, collect data, improve what you're doing. As long as you don't share it, it's fine. So if you can get people's emails, that's wonderful, because that's a future way for you to connect with people. You can send them a follow-up survey, but really what I found works the best is giving a postcard to people at my physical events. I have the opposite. So this is like the postcard that I send them. This particular event was all about animals in the deep sea. I had them address the postcard to themselves. And then on the opposite side, I asked them what the coolest thing they learned was and what they hope to remember going forward. I would then wait a month, write down some key pieces of information that they gave me at the top, like how many science events do you attend a year? Because I wanted to know if I'm preaching to the choir or not. And then I cut that little like data slip that I wanted off and then mailed it to them a month later. It reminds them what they learned to reinforce the ideas that we taught them. And then it also reminds them that, hey, Skype a Scientist gave you a cool event on this night. Maybe your collaborators too, so we were collaborating with Science Friday for this. So it reminds them that our organization gave them a cool night, and it reinforces what they learned. And it gives us the data on what actually landed. Because maybe you think, man, everybody's gonna leave here knowing these two things, but then you get all the data back and you're like, oh my God, they took something completely different from what I thought they would learn. So that's like very useful feedback for you. When we're doing science communication, we're trying to make bridges between the scientific community and other people. And the easiest way to screw that up is by offending someone. And so it's really, really important to take the time to make sure that you are checking your language, using inclusive language and inclusive practices. So make sure that you're not using words that are exclusive, ableist, or any other negative social situations. And so also design your events and your science communication online to be inclusive of everyone so that everyone can access your science communication. And I will talk more about precisely how to do that in later slides. I've found personally that Twitter is a really, really powerful place for getting a crash course on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I have a list of people that you can check out that are doing really good work on this. If you go to this link here, you'll see my list of people that I have really learned a lot from. So making your science communication accessible. This is not a comprehensive list of everything that you have to do, but it's a good start. So let's say you're giving a talk like I'm giving right now, or you're hosting an event. You always want to use a mic. I don't care how loud you think you are. Some people rely on the microphone to hear what you're saying, even if you are a relatively loud person. For in real life events, if you can include a live stream, that's great, because people who weren't able to physically get to your event for any number of reasons, be it financial, child support related, physical movement issues, having a live stream helps reach those people. If you can, either get captioning or an ASL interpreter. Skype a Scientist always has an ASL interpreter at our events, or at our online events rather. We're working on IRL as well, to help everyone be able to access our information. If you're making a video, it's not done until you have subtitles. If you're doing a podcast, there are many people who volunteer to transcribe podcasts, and that helps a lot as well. And if you're posting pictures to Twitter, Instagram, or any other social media platform, make sure that you're including alt text, because screen readers read that, and then it tells the person what the picture is. So this is an example of what it looks like on Twitter. You basically click Alt or Edit, and then it gives you the option to type in a lot more characters than your original tweet gets of what your picture is showing. When you're making infographics or any other pictures, check it to make sure that people who are colorblind can actually see what you're trying to show. With photographs, you can't do that as easily, but if you're making an infographic where you're choosing the colors, go the extra step to make sure everyone can see what you're trying to communicate. when you're doing science communication and not just representing yourself, you want to make sure that you are including everyone. So you want to ask yourself, can disabled people do my activity? Like I already mentioned, the colorblind friendliness is really important. You want to make sure that mobility impaired people and hearing impaired people can come as well. And think about if everyone can participate easily, because remember, like I said before, no one owes us anything, including time and attention. So you don't want to make it super hard for people to show up to your event. You want it to be easy. And so if you can, I know this is like next level science communication, but if you can get childcare at your event, that really broadens out who can attend. Ask if where you've chosen is accessible to public transportation. Not everybody has a car. And whether it's wheelchair accessible. That really helps a lot. And of course, this I should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Make sure that if you have a group of people representing science, that your panel or performing group is not all white, is not all male. A really important thing to note here is that a lot of underrepresented folks get repeatedly pinged to do work for free, so you may have to pay them, and also don't repeatedly ping the same people. In the last 3 months, there's been an amazing increase in these organized groups on Twitter and many other places that will give you a list of people who are willing to do stuff in science communication. So check out the weeks that are like Black in any number of things, chemistry, physics, astro, all sorts of areas of expertise. Micro is coming up in, I think, October. So you can find people that way. Don't just always go to the one person in your department to be your token person, because that's messed up and we can't do that. The next question you want to ask yourself is whether you're actually serving the community that you are claiming to be serving. So this is often true in environmental circles like we're mostly in. You want to ask yourself, like, is the community that I want to reach, does environmentalism have a real, is that important for their lives? Because if they are struggling just with food stability, just like getting food on the table, that may not, like talking to them about the giant Pacific Ocean garbage patch is maybe not the right move, because it's so far from their everyday lives. And so you need to have the empathy to know what subjects are important for them. And so you may need to, for example, you may need to work with community partners to assess what is relevant to that community so that you have a successful event. So for example, this was in collaboration with Science Friday and the Queens Museum. We were at a science fiction festival in Queens, and everybody at that festival was speaking Spanish because that was the target audience. And so the Queens Museum talked to Science Friday and Skype a scientist and said, hey, we'd really like to have a science table at our event. And we said, okay, great. So the science communicator at Science Friday, my friend Diana, and I, we're both white girls who don't speak Spanish at all or don't speak it super well. And so you have to ask yourself, am I the right person for this job? And in this case, we were not the right people to go in and have an English-speaking science table at a Spanish-speaking festival. So we hired two Spanish speakers, one comedian and one scientist, to be the public-facing part of our event. And the two of us just did all of the prep work and all that kind of thing. And so the event itself was trying to teach all about animal adaptations. And so the kids basically made these like Frankenstein monsters of different animal adaptations and then battled their creations in a ring. And our comedian would commentate on everything going on, and our scientist then afterward explained why one monster beat the other monster because of the animal adaptations that each animal had. And so I don't know if you all can hear this, actually. We didn't test this. But either way, the important part here is that, yeah, okay, thanks, David. Teaming up with community partners can be really, really powerful and give you information that you may not already have. And so don't be afraid to team up with people who already know the community that you're trying to reach. Here are some quick practical tips for social media. The first being, don't be afraid to engage with people who you think are doing cool work or that you would generally like to engage with. Keep content coming out regularly, and that can be as often as once a day. Put people in your content. There was a study done called Scientists Who Selfie, and they found, those researchers found that if you put people in the pictures with their science, it's a lot easier for other people who are not scientists to connect with the work. And so putting faces to science is so, so important for us to seem friendlier, more open, and more approachable. And approachability is really important if people want to talk to you. When using hashtags, always capitalize the beginning of every word. This is an accessibility issue because screen readers will know that the first hashtag here says Squid Squad, and the second hashtag, it will perhaps butcher the pronunciation. So that really helps accessibility-wise. And a scheduler is your best friend if you're trying to build a social media following. So I use Buffer, but you can use whatever you want. Hootsuite, there's others as well. And so if you had, maybe you're in the field and you collected like 1,000 cool pictures, and then for the rest of the year, you're in the lab. Maybe share those pictures by scheduling them out so you don't have to see them. I, for one, really, really like social media because it's a place where we can be a little silly and play around with the format. So, for example, one really important ocean conservation issue to me is not killing nautiluses. They're an endangered cephalopod, but their shells are absolutely gorgeous. And so people may want to kill them for their shells. Now, I could go on a thread and rant about how unethical it is to harvest nautiluses for their shells, or we could use this Drake meme that gets the same point across, but people are laughing about it instead of feeling guilty. And so that really, again, focuses on how people are feeling in response to the message and how effectively that message gets across. Also, if you're just starting in science communication, be prepared to preach to the choir for a fair amount of time because breaking out of our bubble takes time, and that's okay. Don't feel bad. It's not you. It's how social media works. So here are what I consider the commandments of science communication. The first is entertain people before you educate them because nobody owes us anything, and it's really important for us to hook people. The second is no jargon, which sounds easy, but the longer you've been in science, the harder that is. Always meet people where they already are. Don't expect them to come to you. Design events as activities instead of one-way deliveries of information. Be inclusive in your design, in your language, in every possible way you can. Think outside your bubble in terms of what people care about and how you can best connect with them. Include stories wherever you can because humans are storytellers, and there's a lot of really good information online about how to incorporate stories into your science communication. Be yourself because we need scientists to be perceived as being as diverse as the human population. So being yourself is really a beneficial thing to do for the broader science community. And lastly, I know I've given you a lot of information on how to communicate science today, but perfect is the enemy of the good. Just get out there and practice and try. As long as you're being inclusive and kind, you should do well. All right, so I'm gonna quickly go through the program that I started called Skype a Scientist. We connect people with science via personal connections. And so we offer people the opportunity to meet a scientist for free, and we really emphasize conversation over one-way delivery of information, as I've said to you probably 10 times in the last 40 minutes. We connect in 4 ways. We match classrooms and scout troops and library groups, any kind of group that wants to talk to a scientist with a scientist. We also have live sessions on Zoom. Those are live streams on the Zoom webinar format, just like this. We do live shows on the East Coast when there's not a pandemic. And during a pandemic, every Thursday, we do trivia nights for adults. And we also sometimes do kind of conversations for adults that maybe little ears shouldn't be hearing about. So far, we've connected 28,000 classrooms with scientists across the world. We've been in 75 countries, and we can reach students where there may not be a science center, there may not be scientists in their community nearby or accessible, and we can reach people everywhere, which is a really powerful part of our program. And this is how the matching happens. The teachers, or whatever the group leader is, tells us what they want. They tell us the type of scientist they're interested in. They tell us a little bit about their students. And then the scientists tell us who they want to be communicating with. They tell us what ages they're comfortable speaking with and how many sessions they want to do throughout the semester, among a couple other important pieces of information for matching. Once a week, we match everybody up. And so just to give a sense, this past semester during the pandemic, we matched almost 7,000 groups. So we're growing all the time, and we hope that this fall is even bigger than last semester. In Skype a Scientist Live, we do these about 1 to 4 times a week during the pandemic. We do them all the time, but during the pandemic, we've really ramped them up to help families who are stuck at home without education. The audience submits questions via the Q&A, just like we're doing right here. We're protected from Zoom bombing, and we have ASL interpretation. We bring in scientists who I think are really cool, and we cover a wide variety of scientific topics, so everybody can get something that they're interested in. We also have them available on YouTube afterward. Like I said, we do interactive science events at bars when there's no pandemic, and on Zoom when there is a pandemic. And we really just want to play with adults with science. So we're not lecturing, we're playing the whole time. And we're also going to be releasing, once the pandemic is over, because we don't want to release this during a pandemic, protocols for getting trivia out to local bars in your area. We have hundreds of questions for trivia and other protocols for games that you can play with your audience. So once that vaccine is out, check back with us, and we'll be able, you'll be able to download protocols just like you get a protocol for a Western blot. This will be protocols that we've tried and tested and have worked for science communication. Every semester, we send out a survey and we quantify our success. And we found overall that our program is really viewed well by both scientists and teachers. 78% of teachers said their students' perceptions of scientists were changed by the experience of our program. And over half of the teachers said their students were more confident in science and more likely to pursue a career in science. And so every year we get bigger and bigger. You'll notice that the classrooms look like they went down for 2020, but that's because we've only done one of the 2 semesters. So we are predicting that we'll have our biggest year ever at Skype a Scientist in 2020. One other thing that I wanted to make sure you were aware of before I let you go is that Skype a Scientist is part of a bigger consortium of other groups, including Science Friday, Rock EDU, that's at Rockefeller University, BioBus, and some other big players in science communication. We're gathering together to form a community of practice that will be open to other science communication groups as well, and that may include you. And so we are basically trying to assemble best practices to help science events go well for everybody, because when one of us does well, our whole community does well, and we want to support our broader community. And so if you'd like to learn more or maybe join, check out livescicollective.com. That's my last little bit. If you want to participate in Skype a Scientist yourself, I think you absolutely should. We always are looking for more scientists. Go to skypeascientist.com, click Get Involved, and then get matched up, contact your match, and then you'll have a Q&A session whenever it works for you and your match about science, maybe what it's like to be a scientist, maybe just sea slugs or whatever it is that you study. The one important thing to note is that to be a scientist, you have to be in graduate school or past graduate school. That's also acceptable if you had a bachelor's and now you're working professionally as a scientist. That's a scientist. It's we firmly believe that undergraduate researchers are scientists. The reason we don't for this program is that the first year that we did this, we included undergraduate researchers because of course they're scientists, and we had some teachers be pretty nasty to them because they were young, and we don't want that to ever happen again. And so that's why the age, not age, but career stage bar is set where it is. I want to thank you all for taking the time today to come and listen. There's a couple groups that I think you should all be aware of if you're interested in science communication. One is Massive. If you go to Massive Sci, put that into Google, you'll find their group. They are helping with science writing, run by a lot of really fantastic people to help scientists be better science writers. Letters to a Pre-Scientist is a pen pal program where scientists get paired up with kids to communicate in like a pen pal situation about science. And of course, we hope that you'll participate in Skype a Scientist this fall. And lastly, there's that list of people who I've learned so much from on Twitter. Now, I have this completely visually overwhelming graph. If you're like, you know, Sarah, I've listened to you for the last 45 minutes, but I really don't know where I could possibly fit into science communication. Well, just play with this flowchart while I'm answering questions, and maybe if you don't like the answer, start again and answer differently, just like any other BuzzFeed quiz. And with that, I just, again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk, and I'd love to hear all of your questions.